Assalamu alaikum, dear viewers and followers. Welcome to economics.com 0.2, where we explain economics in simple way. In this channel, we talk about important economic topics, market trends, and how they affect our daily lives. Whether you are a student or a business owner or just someone who wants to learn about economics, this channel is for you. Stay with us, we explore interesting topic and make economics easy to understand. If you have not subscribed yet, make sure to hit the subscribe button and turn on bell notification so you will never miss the new videos. Let's start the today's topic. Today's topic is one of the most frequently asked questions in exams, interviews, and even in daily lives. Why is the demand curve always negative slope? This is a fundamental concept in economics, and understanding it helps us how market works. The representation of demand curve that shows the relationship between the price of goods and the quantity demanded. It always negatively sloped, meaning that when the price decreases, the quantity demand increases, and when the price increases, the quantity demand decreases, assuming all the factors remain constant. This inverse relationship is known as the law of demand. The downward slope of demand curve shows that the prices falls and the quantity demand increases. This because consumers are more willing to buy when prices are lower. The downward slope in exam demand curve explained by three key economics principle. One is the income effects, second is substitution effects, third is diminishing marginal utility. One of the more fundamental principle in economics, the law of demand. This is an important concept in understanding consumer behavior, market pricing, and business strategies. In jobs interviews, real life economic discussion, this principle is most important. What is law of demand? The law of demand stated that assuming all other factors remain constant, there is an inverse relationship between price and quantity demanded. This means that when the price of a product increases, the quantity demand decreases, and when the price decreases, the quantity demand increases. This happens because consumers prefer to buy more of goods when it is cheaper and less when it's become very expensive. Business and policymakers use this principle to make pricing and production decisions. Let's see the graph stated in the slides. The y-axis represent the price of products which increase as we move upward. The x-axis represent the quantity demand which increase as we move to the right. The downward slope demand curves visually illustrate the inverse relationship between price and demand. Price falls, demand increases, and as price rises, demand falls. At the highest point, price level P1, here P1, the quantity demand is at its lowest price Q1. This means fewer consumers are willing or able to buy the products when it is expensive. As the price drop to moderate level P2, the quantity demand increases to Q2, indicate that more consumers are willing to purchase the product at this lower prices. When prices reach at the lowest point P3, The quantity demand is at its highest Q3 since the product is now more cheaper. More people can afford it, leading to higher in demand. This negative relationship between price and quantity demand is what gives the demand curve its downward sloping shape. It tells us the consumer are sensitive to price changes, and business must consider this when they are setting their prices. Where does this matter? The law of demand is essential for understanding how markets function. Business use this principle to determine the optimal price strategies, ensuring that they are set their prices at levels that attract buyers while maximizing their profits. Government use this concept to predict how taxes, subsidies, and policies will impact consumer behavior. Even in our daily lives, we experience this law. Discounts, sales, and promotion work because of the law of demand. When products go on sales, demand increases because the prices is lower just the suggested. The income effect is an important concept in economics that explain why a change in price affects consumer purchasing power and demand. This is one of the most frequently asked topic in exam because it helps us to understand where demand increases when prices drop and decreases when prices rise. What is the income effect? The income effects refer to the change in the quantity demand of goods due to change in consumer real income causes by change in prices of goods itself. When goods prices falls, the consumer feels wealthier because they can now buy more with the same income. When the prices rises, their purchasing power shrinks, leading to a decrease in demand for that goods. For the income effects, need to more explanation with their graph to fully understand how the income effect works. This graph usually represents how change in price affects consumer purchasing power and demand for goods. In this graph, first we understand what the axis represent. The y-axis is vertical, represent a commodity B, which the consumer can buy. The axis is horizontal, represents a commodity A, an other product that the consumer is willing to purchase. The consumer must choose between these two commodities based on their budget, which is affected by price changes. Now focus on budget constraint lines in this blue lines. These lines show how much of each goods a consumer can afford based on their income and price of goods. The initial price ratio denoted by P0, the new price ratio denoted by P1. P0 represents the original prices before any changes. P1 shows what happened when the price of commodity A decreases. The movement from P0 to PA means that with the same income, the consumer can now buy more of a commodity A and before. The price of commodity A has fallen. Consumer purchasing power is increases. Let's see this graph, allowing them to afford more. Now the origin of curves. The orange curve, which is called indifference curve, in represented in a orange color. That's why I called orange curves. This curve represents the consumer satisfaction level, means utility. The further outward the curve, the higher their satisfactions. The initial utility level shows the consumer starting a point before the price changes. The new utility level is a higher consumer, showing that after the price drop, the consumer can afford more and is better off. The consumer is at, see in the graph, in this graph, the consumer is at point X on the initial price P0. This is where they allocate their income between commodity A and commodity B before any price changes. Now let's say the price of commodity A drops while the consumer income remains the same. This price increase and consumers' real purchasing power, allowing them to buy a more of a commodity A. As a result, the consumer move point Z on a higher indifference curve. Represent they now buy a more of commodity A. They might also buy a more of commodity B depending on their preference. This overall satisfaction has increased, shown by their movement to higher indifference curve. This shift from X to Z is called an income effect. As the prices has effectively increased, the consumer real income lending to higher the demand. Let's consider the opposite situation. If prices of a commodity A and increases instead of decreased, what would be happen? The consumer budget constant would shifted inward, meaning they can now afford less of commodity A. This would move them to lower utility levels, meaning a decrease in purchasing power and drop in demand. Instead of moving point Z, they would move downward, reducing their overall consumptions. Substitution effects. Uh, the other reason demand curve is negatively sloping is substitution effect. Substitution effect is an important concept in economics that explain how consumer adjust their choices when prices change. These effects play a direct role in a shaping demand curve downward slope. The graph in this slide crucial important as it visually demonstrated how the substitution effect and income effects work together. Before we examine the effect, we need to understand the structure of this graph. The y-axis represents good y and x-axis represents goods x. There are two goods x and y. The initial budget line represent the consumer original income and amount of good X and good Y they can afford before the price changes. The new budget line BL show how their purchasing power has shifted after the change in prices. A movement from BL to BL not happen because the prices of good X have fallen, making it more affordable. Now let's examine the blue curve, which are called indifference curve. U denoted by U utility and U dot. These curves show a different level of consumer satisfaction. The original curve U, the new curve is U dot, is a higher level of satisfaction, meaning the consumer is now better off due to the prices drop of a good X. Moving to from U to U dot means the consumer getting a more satisfaction without increasing income. This is a key understanding the substitution and income effect. This graph highlights two different effects caused by price decreases in good X. Substitution effects. Good X has become a cheaper. The consumer reallocate their spendings, buying a more of good X and less of goods Y. Income effects. The price drop of good X also means the consumer has a more real income. They can afford more of the both good. Because of this increase in purchasing power, the consumer move from X naught small x to capital X dot, where they consume even more of good X. This graph usually show where demand increases when price decreases. These two effects reinforce the negative slope of the demand curve. As our prices decreases, demand increases. One of the most important principle in consumer behavior is law of diminishing marginal utility. This principle play an important role in shaping the demand curve and explain why as we consume more of good, the additional satisfaction we get from it decreases. This concept is essential in understanding the consumer choices, price strategies, and even policy making. The law of diminishing marginal utility states that as a consumer more consume a more unit of goods, additional satisfaction utility derived from each extra unit decline. In other words, the first few units provide a high satisfaction, but each additional unit contribute less and less to overall happiness. This is why people tend to consume a limited quantity of goods even if prices are low. It also explains why businesses use discount and offers to encourage consumptions. Let's carefully illustrate the table that represents the relationship between total utility and marginal utility. You may see in the screen. The first column shows the number of units consumed. The second column displays the total utility, the total satisfaction gained from consuming all previous units. The third column calculates the marginal utility, the additional satisfaction gained from the consuming of one extra units. First unit, total utility is equal to 10 marginal unit. Marginal utility is equal to 10. Second, total utility increase 18, but marginal utility decrease to 8. Third consume, the total utility rises 24 and the marginal utility falls 8 to 6. By the 6th unit consumes, the marginal utility reaches the 0, meaning the consumer is fully satisfied. At the 7th consuming unit, the marginal utility become a negative -2, meaning consuming a more accurate reduce the satisfaction of the consumer. This is called disutility. This data visually represents how satisfaction decreases with each additional unit consumed. This effect explained by why demand curve sloped downward. Since additional unit provided a less values, consumers are willing to pay less. Why business use this offer? They know customer would not buy an excessive amount unless a price drop. Why ownership over consumption leads to a disutility. It at the some point, consuming more can become unpleasant, leading to decline in demand. Let's move its graph. The graphical representation of diminishing marginal utility, which built on the table from the previous slides. This graph is crucial in understanding where demand decreases, consumer consumption increases, and where consumers make rational decisions based on their satisfaction level. The graph consists in a two part. Graph A is a total utility and graph B is a marginal utility. In graph A, y-axis represent the total satisfaction and x-axis represent the number of units. Initially, total utility increases at a decreasing rate and reach its peak at the 6th unit consumed. After the 6th consumption of units, the total utility start to decline, meaning that consuming more causes leads to dissatisfaction. See in the graph B, same as y-axis represent the marginal utility, x-axis represent the goods of consumed, units of goods consumed. The downward sloping marginal utility curve shows that as a consumption increases, marginal utility decline. At a point 0, at the 6th consumed unit, it's turned to negative. This graph is represent the consumer stop buying a good after a certain point, because the extra satisfaction from a consuming another unit is not it worth it. From reduced prices to encourage additional purchases, the demand curve slope are downward because consumers are only willing to buy more of its prices is lower and compensate for a declining utility. How this graph this graph is related to the negative slope demand curve. See this graph, the marginal utility decreases. Consumers are only willing to buy an additional unit if its prices is fall. This creates a downward slope of demand curves. Lower utility leads to lower demand at higher prices. This explains why business offer discounts and bulk purchases. It much the decline in a marginal utility with a lower prices. This graphical representation gives us a clear understanding of why demand falls as price rises. The principle of diminishing marginal utility play a fundamental role in a consumer decisions making, pricing strategies, and economic policies. These lectures discussions bring us to close on why the demand curve is always negative sloped. In this lecture we explore the law of demand, income effect, and substitution effect, and diminishing marginal utility, all of which helps to explain consumer decision making and market behavior. Understanding these concepts allow us to see where demand increases when prices drop and how businesses and policymakers use this principle to shape this strategy. Thank you for joining these sessions. Stay connected, keep exploring the economics, and do not forget to like, follow, and comments for more useful content. See you in the next time. Keep learning, stay curious, and continue exploring the economics.